Greetings and welcome back to Junior English. We are in our MyPerspectives volume on page 175, and we're looking at Emily Dickinson's classic, They Shut Me Up in Prose. This is a fascinating little poem. It's going to speak to so many of us in ways of our reading, for example, of the great Harry Potter series, and the fact that Harry is put under the stairs in his room, shut up. There's some debate about to what degree this poem is actually autobiographical. Was Emily, in fact, at times treated this poorly by her parents? Let's enjoy the poem. They shut me up in prose. They shut me up in prose, as when a little girl they put me in the closet because they liked me still. Could themselves have peeped and seen my brain go round, they might as wise have lodged a bird for treason in the pound. Himself was but to will, and easy as a star, looked down upon captivity, and laughed. No more have I. By the way, Emily once wrote in a letter, Maddie, child, no one could ever punish a Dickinson by shutting her up alone. The idea being that Emily lives this life of the mind, and therefore because she lives this life of the mind, you can't lock her away. It's impossible. Now, of course, the antecedent to the pronoun they is always going to be the interesting one. It's clear that she's not really referencing the parent until possibly the second line with the simile of as. In other words, what does it mean to be shut up in prose? Czeslaw Mieszko, in his classic treatise on poetry, argued in his opening lines that poetry is way more powerful than prose. Prose seems to kind of want to capture, and poetry seems to kind of want to release. And of course, this idea of releasing, especially releasing of the bird, is going to be one of the beautiful images of this poem. Dickinson always was working or dancing between what was prose and what was poetry. There were many, of course, who read her poems, especially after she passed and the poems were being shared, published, to argue this is in fact not poetry, in the same way that many argued that Whitman's Leaves of Grass, 1855, first edition, was not poetry. Whatever it is, it's not poetry. Notice the idea of being shut up. That also is interesting. In other words, they want me to speak in prose, whoever the they is. They want me to speak in prose instead of giving me the opportunity or the freedom, we'll get to it in a moment in this poem, the freedom of poetry. I love this about Emily Dickinson. She reminds us that poetry should have this expansive quality to it. And the poetry that you guys are writing should be expansive. You shouldn't feel in any way limited whatsoever. Then she comes to this simile, which is obviously a very disturbing simile in a number of ways, as when a little child, here's a different they put me in the closet. By the way, notice child and closet both capitalized, because they liked me still. Now, there's such a compelling use of the word still in Emily Dickinson as in Walt Whitman. I think the great poet T.S. Eliot learned how to use the word still from his study of Dickinson and Whitman. Notice the word still here has two different meanings. One has to do with movement, the other has to do with duration. Notice here, in other words, she says, when I just couldn't be contained, and I was driving them nuts as a child, they would put me in the closet and shut me up. Think of it maybe as time out, right? Some of us enjoying time out when we were kids. And time out, in other words, we need you to just sit still. Enough with it already. But notice the paragraph or the stanza break. And then at line 5, it's the word still with an exclamation point, right? That is to say, still. Really? Like, are you serious? Like, you think you could keep me still over time? Could themselves have peeped, in other words, the one that locked them out, and seen my brain, now it's going to be interesting whether she's talking brain or mind here, go round, in other words, all the things I was thinking, they might as wise have lodged a bird for treason in the pound. In other words, trying to lock me up, she says, is impossible in the same way you can't lock a bird up because the bird has to be free to fly. Notice, in the pound, himself was but to will, and easy as a star, looked down upon captivity and laugh. No more have I. In other words, she says, I've always laughed at this notion that because I am alone, I am lonely. She says they are not the same thing, and here's why. The brain. Now, what she means by the brain is, of course, as we've said in other studies of other poems, is always going to be a debate. She'll use the word brain and mind and soul often interchangeably. And to that degree, what is she actually saying? Well, I think at 2A, let's go ahead and go to work here. At 2A, what is she saying? If you have an active mind, you're never bored. You're never bored. You always have something to do if you're capable of enjoying the life of the mind. At 2B, notice the use of the word still in her word choice, as we've commented so regularly. Dickinson may be the greatest poet, maybe along with Whitman, at word choice. Knowing the right word at the right time, and of course stacking these two stills together is wonderful, isn't it? At 3A, well, there's so many different places that we could go here in talking about the life of the mind, the power of the mind, the enjoyment of the mind. There's so many different ways. Think of Virginia Woolf's Room of One's Own as simple observation, right? We've given full lectures on it at learnstrong.net. I mean, it's a precious observation that if you can just enjoy the life of the mind, the life of thought, the life of creative thought, the life of the imagination. Remember, it was Einstein who's purported to have said that imagination is more important than knowledge. Finally, at 3B, when was the last time that you laughed at the idea that you were being put into captivity by being, told you had to be still or whatever, and you knew something that everybody else didn't know, that while maybe you were sitting there still, you were moving like crazy in your mind. I'm hopeful that the next time that happens, you'll remember this wonderful little poem. Thank you.